Welcome to Retail's Most Wanted, the podcast that examines the latest issues related to organized retail crime and how retailers and policymakers are fighting back against today's organized crime syndicates. Our guest today is Rachel Michelin. She's the president and CEO of the California Retailers Association, aka Cal Retailers. California retailers operate in one of the most complex legal and regulatory environments anywhere in the country. That's why the California Retailers Association recently launched the California Retail Law Center. It's a new initiative designed to bring retail legal leaders together to collaborate, to share insights, and to help shape smarter policy. That conversation is coming up right after this word from our sponsor. Retail's Most Wanted is brought to you in partnership with LVT, securing physical environments through intelligent automation. Learn more at lvt.com. That's lvt.com. Today we're talking about why the California Retailers Association created the California Retail Law Center. We're going to talk about the pressures retailers are navigating and what other states should be watching as California continues to shape the national regulatory landscape. Rachel Michelin is our guest. Rachel, welcome back to the show. It's been almost a year since you were here, but we're always glad to have someone come back for another round on Retail's Most Wanted.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, let's start here with the why now question. CRA recently launched the California Retail Law Center. What drove the decision to create the center now, and what gap are you trying to fill for retail legal teams?
Well, really this started about 2 years ago. CRA was one of 6 trade associations that was involved in California around PAGA, the Private Attorney General's Act, negotiations to make changes to that, which was a real cost driver for doing business in the state. And as we had more and more conversations with legal teams from our member companies throughout the country on that bill, it really became an idea of myself and the chair of that, Danielle Hojas, who at the time was the board chair for CRA. And we realized that there was a real need to provide an opportunity for legal professionals, law firms, in-house counsels to really have a place to go to talk about the regulatory environment in the state, the compliance environment in the state. Ironically, we find ourselves filing a number of lawsuits now in California, trying to overturn some of the bills and statutes that you just cannot comply with. And so we were excited to finally launch it. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for information sharing, a way for us to really lean in and be a real factor in hopefully making some changes in California that will lead to making it a little bit more business friendly.
California often seems to set the tone for regulation in other parts of the country. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest legal and regulatory pressures retailers are navigating right now in California?
I'd say there's a couple. The first, I would say, is the onslaught of EPR, which is producer regulations around recycling. We have SB Senate Bill 54, which is a very broad, dynamic piece of legislation that will be very expensive. And this is a perfect example of when that bill passed, there were other statutes on the books that make it almost impossible for producers to comply with SB 54. I think that's a huge issue that I hear from our member companies on a daily basis. I think we've got issues around Cal OSHA, workplace violence regulations that have gone a bit too far. It exceeded what we negotiated with the legislature on that bill. And that's really what we see happening in California is that we will go to the legislature and we'll negotiate a piece of legislation. We'll work with the governor's office, we'll work with the legislature, and we'll come to an agreement on the statute. But once it goes to these regulatory agencies, it drastically changes. 54 is a great example. It was a 60-page negotiated bill that ballooned to over 212 pages of regulation. And so part of the challenge is also of the law center is to start really pointing out that one of the biggest challenges in California, it's not the legislation, it truly is the regulation. And it really is, we need to have more oversight on the regulatory boards and the regulatory agencies. There needs to be accountability, and that goes to the legislature. And it's something we continue to push. We will continue to do that this year and next. But really, we want to see our members, CRA members want to comply, but we have to have a path to compliance. And a lot of time we don't have that with a number of these regulatory packages.
Yeah, it doesn't work if you ask the impossible, that's for sure.
Correct.
I want to talk a little bit about the litigation environment right now. Retailers in California often face a really high level of litigation risk. How does the California Retail Law Center help retailers stay ahead of litigation trends and compliance challenges before they become major problems?
One of the biggest challenges that and I'm hoping that this will be part of the Law Center, and it was the intent partially of the Law Center, I'm not an attorney. So I really am looking forward to spending more time with in-house legal and with those professionals, because I do think there's an opportunity for us to push back and really try to shine a light on the fact that we need to have regulations and compliance pathways, and litigation shouldn't be the next stop. You're absolutely right. Retailers face huge amounts of litigation risks in the state, but at the same token, CRA now is pushing back in litigation on a number of different issues related to packaging, related to taxes, related to other issues that really, I think what we need to do is step up and lean in, and not always, we need to run towards some of these fights, not away from them. And I really think the Law Center will enable us to do that, enable me to do that. That's my job as the president of the Retailers Association, is to be that sharp end of the stick and defend the industry in the state. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. In terms of compliance, I think we'll be able to flag some things during the rulemaking process where we can get feedback from our member companies a little bit quicker than we typically do. So then we can then go advocate not only to the agencies, but to the governor's office to make sure that we get some of those changes. I did that in California with SB 54 when a regulatory package came out that was not going to work for producers or retailers at all. And we were able to advocate to the governor for him to pull that package back and make How Recycle work on it some more so that we could get better regulations so our members could comply with. So there is opportunity there. I think this is the first time any state retail association has done something like this, and I'm excited about it. And candidly, there's no stopping the fact that this could explode into maybe it's a Western region law center. Maybe we bring in other states. I think that there is power for the industry when we all work collaboratively on a lot of these issues that, as you said, start in California and then typically spread to other states.
One of the unique aspects of the center is bringing together in-house retail legal teams. Tell me, why is collaborating among corporate legal leaders so important in a regulatory environment like you have in California?
They share a lot of the same experiences, but they also sometimes look at issues from a different perspective, which I think is always important. This really came to light too last fall, where we held for the first time a legal policy regulatory conference, where really for the first time we tried to get people from different parts of companies to come together and talk about a lot of these issues. And it was an overwhelming success. And so when you see individuals come together, particularly with that legal background, particularly understanding how the legal system works, and they bring that perspective, it really does make a difference. I always say that the legislature, I would say a quarter of the legislature is attorneys. And I love to bring attorneys in to talk to members of the legislature because they'll talk attorney to attorney, which really is a different perspective and understanding. And I think it helps us get that information across, that all we are trying to do is make these statutes and these regulations work. But when they continue to put obstacles in our way, that is what is increasing the cost of living in the state of California. So that over and over again, if we can work collaboratively on reducing the compliance burden and making the regulatory system in California work in a streamlined fashion, I actually think that would result in lowering costs of goods and services across the state, which candidly, number one issue in the state of California is affordability. And as a consumer-facing industry, that's top of mind all the time.
There's playing offense and there's playing defense when it comes to lobbying, policy making, trying to influence public policy or regulatory environments. How will the center help retail legal teams move from reacting to regulation to maybe anticipating what's coming next?
Education, I think, is going to be a big piece on both sides. I think part of our job is to bring those ideas and what's going on and our intel from the ground in real time to the center. So the folks that are engaged in the center understand what's coming down the pipeline so we can react quickly. But I think the other big piece of this is having the center and the folks and the companies involved in that also use it as an education opportunity for people in the legislature and in the regulatory environment. CRA has a really good reputation in Sacramento. And so we're able to have some conversations with leaders from the different regulatory boards and agencies in the state. And a lot of times what it comes down to is they just don't understand how the retail industry works and how some of these regulations will actually be implemented. And when we're able to bring in subject matter experts and show them in real time, this is the impact it's going to have not only on the business, but most importantly on the consumer, we tend to get a better outcome. So I'm excited about making those connections. I'm excited about bringing that intel to the members of part of the coalition, and then also seeing where this leads.
The center is also designed to support CRA's advocacy efforts in Sacramento. How can insights from retail legal teams help shape more workable policies and smarter regulations for the industry?
Well, when we're dealing with legislation, that's law, right? That's what you're going to end up getting sued on. So I think to really have that input, and we really value that. There's a lot of really complicated issues going on in Sacramento right now around dynamic pricing, around antitrust, things that are very specific. And to have that insight of legal professionals is key. Because otherwise, I don't want to go negotiate a deal with the legislature, with the governor, that I don't think is going to benefit the retail industry and those operating in the state of California. And a lot of times it's the legal folks that really need to pay attention. What I found sometimes is it takes a while to get to them. And that's what we're trying to do as well through the center is cut that time in half so that they can see this legislation, they can see these statutes or the regulatory packages while we still have time to negotiate. The most frustrating thing I hear is when someone will call me after the fact and say, well, we had some ideas on how you could have made this bill better when the bill is already passed and been signed by the governor, or that regulatory package has already been put into the process to be made final. So what we're hoping to do is get that insight, get that opportunity to take their information and their ideas on how to make legislation or regulations better. And that makes myself and my team better advocates on behalf of the industry.
California policy so often becomes a preview of what other states may adopt. For retailers operating across the country, what developments in California should other states and maybe other retail leaders be watching most closely?
I think dynamic pricing is a big one, or algorithmic pricing as some folks call it. I think there is really a movement this year in Sacramento on really, it's about privacy. I think we're going back to some of those privacy debates we had a few years ago, and some of the groups are trying to move further in that arena, which is really difficult, I think, for retailers. California has the strongest privacy laws for consumers in the nation, but they want to go even further. So I think that's something that's definitely I'm seeing is already happening, but I think that we're going to be the last one standing. Our session goes all the way to the end of August, so a lot will be happening in that space. Antitrust is another one that I think is interesting. There are a number of antitrust bills that have been introduced in California that I think will have a huge impact. We're definitely engaging in those. And I think if they pass here in California, they will certainly spread across the nation. We're dealing with self-checkout and dealing with quotas for the number of employees for self-checkout, where we're seeing a number of our grocery members having to pull out their self-checkout stations throughout the state of California. And we're definitely trying to heed that from spreading, but certainly I think that's something you could see in other states. And then finally, I think just the whole notion around minimum wage. We continue to see particularly local jurisdictions push the envelope when it comes to minimum wage. I think Los Angeles is trying to get up to $30 prior to the Olympics, which has a huge impact, particularly on our smaller retailers and grocery stores. So I think those are some of the conversations that we're having here in the state. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, particularly this year. I think next year, though, when we have a new governor, you will certainly see some of these issues coming back. But we continue as the association to advocate, to lean in, to work with legislators, but then also really try to educate on, as you mentioned before, the unintended consequences of some of this legislation.
As the California Retail Law Center kind of gets up and underway, what does success look like a year from now or 5 years from now from where you're sitting?
I think a year from now, we'll have robust conversations and really be better equipped to lean in next year with the new administration on a number of these issues and really bringing in a legal perspective of the impacts that different proposed regulations or statutes could have on the business community in the state of California. I think going forward, I'll be honest, candidly, we launched it. We've had people reach out who want to work with us already on reforming some of the things. Prop 65 is a big issue in California that impacts retailers. We're talking to folks who want to work with us on how do we reform Prop 65. I never saw that one coming, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to do that. I think that retailers, as I tell legislators, retail's in every single community across the state of California. We are a huge economic driver and workforce development center for millions of Californians. And we want to be part of the solution to make California not only business friendly, but affordable to live. And I think the Retail Law Center will play a huge role in helping us achieve those goals.
Well, Rachel, thanks so much for walking us through the launch of the California Retail Law Center and the work the CRA is doing to support retailers in navigating California's rather complex legal environment at times. Really, really appreciate you weighing in on that for us.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And if you'd like to learn more about the center or how to get involved, you can visit calretailers.com. That's Cal, like the first three letters of California, retailers.com. That's it for this episode of Retail's Most Wanted. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, LVT. And don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button so you can catch each new episode. We drop one every 2 weeks. You can also follow us on X, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. We're everywhere. Thanks for being with us, everyone. And as always, keep up the good fight.